Hello, everybody. This is Fun Police, and I am bringing you a deck tech over one of the new Nemesis divisions that came out just a few hours from the time of this recording, and that is Festung Dunkirk. An interesting division. It draws many similarities to something like the Toulon division that was seen in a previous Nemesis, being a holdout in part of France. This division, compared to Toulon, I would say is a bit more of an aggressive variant. The biggest things that I would say stand out is that its infantry tab, although not bad, is definitely quite different than that of the more well-rounded versions seen in Toulon. Notably, it has a little worse time in close quarters combat, as it doesn't have things like the very powerful Marrow squads, among other things. On top of that, it also has a slightly worse anti-air tab, and notably has a really pitiful air tab itself. So those are big weaknesses. However, it still has the potential to be an extremely powerful artillery division. Its anti-tank is serviceable, and notably, it has more armor running around. So overall, I've built this as a Maverick deck starting out in order to try to capitalize on the fact that I can have a little bit more aggressive power than those I'm going up against in something like Toulon, and be able to essentially take a forward position before bunkering down and taking over. Let's start by talking about the recon division, the recon elements of this division. Pretty much the only thing I've taken here are these Yag commandos. Just essentially a really solid recon squad. They have a radio, they have two MGs for long range firepower, and they even have an explosive for close range. They're just overall really solid. The other options are pretty vanilla and underwhelming, especially because they don't really have anything. Like, you could take maybe these Laffies with a machine gun if you wanted to double up, but I don't see a purpose in them. So, quickly moving on to the infantry tab. The infantry tab has a lot of ways you can build it, but I've built it in a way that leans heavily on disheartened units, backed up by a handful of elite units. So starting out, we have these Luftwaffe Jaegers. The Luftwaffe Jaegers are a decent squad, notably because they're 15 points. You can spam these guys out quite a bit, and they do have a light machine gun to offer firepower. We're going to have a couple ways to help offset the disheartened trait, meaning that these guys will be a bit more reliable, and they're best in A because their availability curve is worse in the later phases. So if you take these in A, that's when they're at their best. If you take them in later phases, there's other things you can be doing. Then we have these Stosstruppen with Panzerfausts. These are essentially 15-point explosive throwers. That's their only purpose. Sometimes they'll help you get like a tank kill, but really their main purpose is to just rush a position, chuck a grenade, and hopefully drag down a much more expensive squad. Uh, they have no capability to win fights otherwise, but for 15 points, they're dirt cheap, and they come in Kubels, so they're relatively fast moving. We have these Festung Grenadiers. This was, I would say, is the best disheartened unit in the entire division. With 15 men in its squad, it's very, very tanky, and it's got an automatic rifle and enough bolt actions to actually kind of fight at range. It's not amazing, but for 20 points, you have 12 of them, and these are going to probably be your main line unit. But you just got to work around the disheartened. We also have these Luftwaffe Flakkampftruppen. Interesting squad. They're essentially Luftwaffe Jaegers that have a little less firepower because one of them is carrying a bazooka. Or Panzerschreck, I should say. The Panzerschreck is a very strong AT weapon. It's pretty much able to one-shot any tank it shoots at, and it's got 250 meters of range. Very, very reliable. These guys are disheartened, but honestly, the fact that we have Panzerschrecks in the infantry tab is another big part of Festung Dunkirk. Where they lack in maybe infantry capabilities, they make up for with like a ton of their units having Panzerschrecks and making them very good at killing tanks that get too close. And these guys are going to help you by being essentially 20-point Panzerschrecks that are decently durable and have a machine gun to shoot at stuff with. We also have the Kriegsmarine Führers. These are our basic leaders. I prefer them over these Luftwaffe-Führers. These guys are 5 points cheaper, and they do come in tractions, so they could very quickly get to a position, but they also are only 4 health. For 5 more points, you're getting double the amount of models in this squad, and you also get 2 machine guns on them, meaning that they can actually shoot at stuff, and every so often help you, like, suppress an enemy unit. It's not a big difference, and if you really prefer the traction, you could absolutely go with these, but I've gone with these guys because the extra durability is nice. Then we have the Jagdkampf. These guys are your top-of-the-line units. They are essentially Brandenburgers that instead of having a explosive, they have a Panzerschreck. But otherwise, their loadouts are the same with G43s, MG42s, and an MP40. They are overall pretty good. They just lack a bit of that CQC power that they otherwise would have in other senses because they don't have that explosive. But they are tank killers, so they're good line infantry, and you can take them. They always come vetted. It's very easy to vet these up. These are just really good units overall. Probably the best infantry in the entire division. But that is the units for Phase A. Now we move on to Phase B. We have the Kriegsmarine Landschützen. These are 10-man squads that have an automatic rifle. They're cheap, 15 points. They're essentially similar to the Luftwaffe Jägers. However, they have a little bit more model health, and they have better availability when coming in B. As you see, the Luftwaffe Jägers only have 18 squads, while you get 24 with these Kriegsmarines. They're not great, but again, cheap swarming units, they're going to help fill out your line and keep your line holding because you don't have a lot of other heavy-duty infantry. So cheap line to keep replacing your like Festungs and Luftwaffe Jägers that have been killed. We have the Kriegsmarine Pioneers, a unit that came from the Toulon division. Also seen over there, was really good in that division as well. Having both a Panzerschreck and an explosive, they are pretty much only there to chuck that grenade and then possibly try to shoot a tank. They don't have any machine guns or automatic rifles, so their capabilities of fighting in like direct engagements is next to none. So you need to be very careful with these guys, but put them in a forest, have them chuck their grenade, and they'll do their job quite well. Then we have another card of Jagdkampf, just getting us more of this excellent, excellent squad. And then finally, Kriegsmarine Infantry in Phase C, just so we have a card to keep spamming out with. These guys are overall a bit... They're not great, but they're not bad either. 12-man makes them relatively durable. They have an MG on them, and then they also have an anti-tank grenade. There are other options here, like you could go with like a basic Grenadier, but they have a slightly better machine gun, but they also don't have the any AT options, so it could come down a bit to preference. The only other units that are really worth mentioning are these Pioneers down here. It's just a basic Pioneer unit. If you just want more CQC, these guys are where you'd find it. Don't take these Yag Pioneers, they suck. They have no way to win fights outside of a single flamethrower. They're crappy Strum Pioneers, and they cost more. These guys are really bad. I would not take them. Moving on, they go to armor. Not a lot going on in armor. Essentially, we just have a card of Stug 3s and a card of Panzer 4s. We're double vetting these in order to maximize their value. The Stug 3s, you get 3 of them in Phase A when you do it like this, and that extra fire rate and accuracy makes them much more lethal compared to if you devetted them, although you do get more, so there are pros and cons. And then the Panzer IV-H is a similar story, but vetting it up just makes it trade a lot better, and the fact that you can actually have a decent amount of medium tanks throughout the game is a very nice thing. You could also take these units at Vet 1 if you wanted to. This would give you more tanks overall, albeit they are a bit weaker. Could depend on how you want to play it. However, because we're Maverick, we're going to try to get away with having just a handful of very elite, powerful tanks, just to give us our best chance of these guys getting value for themselves. But you could do it another way if you wanted to. Support is where I've personally put in a lot of points, invested in a lot of things, because there's a lot of good stuff here and some stuff that really helps this division tick a bit better. Starting off, we have these flamethrower units in tractions. Not a lot to say, but the traction is very, very fast. Flamethrower squads are always good. You pretty much take these in every division because you rush them to the front and they help contest territory. You also just have the traction to move faster than pretty much anybody else. Very few divisions have the traction. So being able to have this guy zoom to a position is very strong. You also have these Kriegsmarine Hutzen Polizei, 15-man squads. They're not great in combat, although they do have one automatic rifle. Their bigger thing is that they are disciplined, and they essentially are here to act as additional leaders to deal with our swarms of different disheartened infantry. Notably, these guys actually got a range buff to their trait. Discipline has gotten a pretty significant range increase, so it's a lot easier to have one of these police units essentially controlling larger swaths of these various units, and that helps a lot in keeping your A-phase from falling apart. Having a couple of Luftwaffe Jaegers that don't have the downsides of their disheartened trait because of one of these guys can be very nice and gives you a lot, can help sturdy your line quite a bit. Then we have one of the most unique units in the division, the Erdkampfflatet 43. It's an autocannon machine gun. It's got 1500-meter range. It is quite expensive at 40 points each. However, you can use a Kubel to rush this to the front, and it can even end up killing lightly armored vehicles like half-tracks and armored cars. It's overall really, really good. Very, very powerful, and does a lot of work. It's a very good, it's probably one of the best machine gun teams in the entire game. Very, very powerful. You also have the IG-33. Overall, just a great gun. Very, very solid. Appears in a lot of divisions. 2,000-meter range. HE rounds are always good. Also, if an enemy tank gets too close, you do have some heat rounds to potentially lob at it. But really the big thing is the HE rounds. Just use it to obliterate the enemy. Soften up positions before you attack into it. We also have our commander. Not much to say, but helps to vet up your relatively unvetted infantry units. Then you have this disheartened MG 271. This is a Hotchkiss, and the big thing is that it's only 25 points. So these are really cheap for the heavy caliber that this is. And this makes it quite good at being a machine gun. It overall just does a lot of damage and can quickly suppress units that get too close, and that just overall makes it a very solid unit. I was a bit suspicious of this and didn't like it at first, opting for MG34s, but I was convinced that this is actually a better option. Very, very nice unit overall because it's so cheap. And then the bog standard card of Opel Blitz in Phase B for supply. Moving on to AT, we have these Pak 38s. Not a whole lot to say. They're a decent overall AT gun. They're good enough to engage enemy medium tanks for the most part and do a job decently well. They're just overall solid, and they come in Kubels so they can quickly move around. You also have the Pak 40, a workhorse German AT gun. It appears in probably, I would say, over half of the Axis divisions, if not more. Not a whole lot to say here. Really solid overall, good range, able to kill pretty much any medium tank, and even has APCR for the heavy duty tanks. Really good. I mean, you just never skip out on these. Also one in Phase B. And then finally, we have the Elite Jagdpanther. You get a single one, double vetted in A. Very, very powerful. Its cannon is insane, especially with double veterancy. It's able to generally outduel almost any tank in a 1v1, and it has the penetration to pretty much punch through anything, including IS-2s and King Tigers, if you run into those. You do only have one of them, so you have to play very carefully, and their armor, although good enough to resist lighter units like medium tanks, they can still be killed by the other heavy tanks. So have to be careful, and it does cost a fortune, but useful to have in your back pocket. Moving on to anti-air, we got a good amount of options, although it's not as potent as something like Toulon because it doesn't have that dual 37mm anti-aircraft gun, but still not bad. Starting off, we have these 40mm flak guns, essentially just a Bofors gun in the German divisions. You could easily also run the Flak 43, which has a higher fire rate but does a little less damage and suppression. Pretty much just whatever you want to do, but they're very similar. I'm just running this because it's slightly different, although maybe the Flak 43 is the better option. Still the cheapest AA that we're really going to make use of, and with how much anti-air we have in here, we can even vet it up to boost it a tiny bit. Then we have the Flak 41 88mm. The Flak 41, good old standard 88, good range for its HE, good range for its anti-air capabilities, covers a lot of the battlefield, also has AP that can kill medium and even heavy tanks, and then can even shoot HE at stuff. It's very well rounded, got a lot of utility in it, and notably comes in the very, very quick Laffy S35T transport truck, which is much, much faster than something like the Maltier. Overall, very nice. We also have the Flak 38 105mm, the big cousin to the 88. It's just got an even better profile on its various tools. It's got the same range as the 88, but it does more damage, suppresses faster, and its AP rounds are even more ridiculous. Just really good. Whenever you have access to 105s, you should be taking them. They're really good. Phase B, we have another card of the 40mm. Again, could replace with the 37 if you feel like it. And then the second card of Flak 38 105s. You could look into this Russian heavy AT gun. However, it's really not any different than the Flak 88. And the Flak 88 just, I think, is a bit better. The only thing you do is you save a bit of points on this, but it's just, I don't think there's really a lot worth it compared to the Flak gun. You also have this Flak Verling, which is not a bad one, but I think you just have better options. But if you wanted something different, you could take like this instead of the Flak 40mm. So you have a decent amount of options in anti-air. Moving on to artillery, we have a variety of different units. Starting off, we have this unique FK-30T howitzer. Overall, it's got a decent rate of fire at 10 rounds per minute. It's relatively cheap, but it doesn't have a radio. In all honesty, with how quickly I've been getting this video out, I haven't had a lot of time to test this. It's a fine howitzer, but it's not like great either. It honestly is probably better to just run some 81mm mortars, but it's kind of a unique unit, so I'm going to keep using it. But if you want it to be more effective, probably better to take the 81mm. We have our battery Führers, just good old leaders in artillery in order to just give us more leaders in B phase. We also have the 194mm off map in phase B, able to suppress down and just obliterate a position. Overall, just great as always. Off maps are usually pretty good, and this one's no exception. And then rounding it off, we have a card of these K419 155mm. Essentially a captured French gun. They have a radio, and although their rate of fire is low, this unit is essentially just a American Long Tom with a different paint job and model. Honestly, not a whole lot to say here, but the Long Tom does a decent job as a heavy artillery piece, especially with radio going, and this is almost a one-for-one carbon copy, so you can just make use of these. We're also bringing in with a munition truck of itself so they can keep counter battery up. Just a solid overall artillery piece. If you were looking to play this division long, these would honestly be the reason to, because you have 4 cards worth of these, so you could absolutely spam these and have insane amounts of artillery running around. There's also another off map. I ran out of room, but you could fit this in somewhere if you felt like it. And then moving on to the air tab, not a lot of options overall. You have these heavy Ju-88 G1 fighters. These things are relatively fast and quite resilient. They're actually quite good in head-on fights, but they have a huge weakness of their being unable to do anything in dogfights. They lose any dogfight they pretty much get into. They're mainly there to intercept something like bombers, Or if for whatever reason the enemy wants to try to head on this with one of their fighters, then you'll win. But this is your only fighter in the entire division, and that really sucks. It's also got low availability, so overall, it's a rough time, and this is very underwhelming in terms of an aircraft fighter. So we're taking it begrudgingly, but honestly, it might be better just to go all in on the anti-air tab and maybe load up with extra anti-air. And then the last thing I'm taking is a Dio 217K1. Just a very interesting bomber because it's got two 1,000 kilogram HE bombs. It's 400 kilometers, which is not very fast, but it does have very good resilience. We don't have fighters to protect this, so this can be very vulnerable when going on bombing runs, which is why I've opted just to take one in Phase B. We have artillery to kind of do a different job if we need like to deal with a problem. So I just have one of these because this package or this payload is so ridiculous. Like this is monstrous in terms of its killing power. You could also take these JU-88s. They still have a very strong package, but they're even slower. You do get an extra one in Phase B, but I like the DO-217 a bit better. The only other option I would say are the ME-410 recon aircraft. You get a couple of them. They have decent resilience and they're very fast. Decent recon planes, but not a lot else going for them. But that is Festung Dunkirk. Just a quick overview of how I've built it. Uh, Obviously, because it's so new, this is not meant to be like a definitive guide. This is just how I've been playing it and having fun with it. It's definitely not a division meant to be like a meta breaker that you're supposed to win every game with. It's more of a for fun division similar to Toulon. But seeing as I love Toulon, I've actually fallen really in love with Dunkirk. I would say it's maybe one of my favorite divisions in the entire game. I've had so much fun with it. And overall, I've just really enjoyed it. It plays very uniquely, but still is decently well rounded. Anyway, that is all I have for you today. If you enjoyed today's content, make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out on any future Steel Division 2 content or other content that I put out. If you've watched all the way through the video, thanks so much for watching, and let me know down in the comments below, have you played with Festung Dunkirk? What are your thoughts on it? Even drop your deck codes down there. I'm always interested to see how other people build decks like this. But that is all for me today. Again, thanks so much for watching, and have a good day.